வந்திருக்கு. மேம் ரெக்கார்டுன்னு ஆப்ஷன் வந்து ஃபுல்லா இருந்ததுக்கு அப்புறம் ஆரம்பிக்கலாம் மேம்.
ஓகே மேம், ஓகே மேம். எஸ். Hope I'm audible. So very good morning to one of our present here, and the session I am taking is the fundamentals of C programming, and so the basic the basic thing we are going to see in this upcoming sessions is how we are using our logical skills to perform a C code. So in the previous sessions we have seen what are the different kinds of problem and how many solutions are there for a particular problem. For example, we have seen in the last session about how to join the 9 dots with just 4 straight lines. To think out of box, we have seen such sessions, and we have seen how there are solutions we can find within the problem itself. And then we have seen we have seen that logical thinking is not something that is going to affect your programming skills. So when you can't, it's different. So we see the differences between coding and programming. So today's session we will be focusing mainly on the history of. First we see how the C has come to this point, and then we go forward with keywords, identifiers, variables. So we are not just going to see what is keywords and what is identifiers. We are going to focus why we are going to use this and how we are going to use this in C. So basically we just focus mainly on the keywords, identifiers and variables, and what are the data types that we can use in C. And furthermore, these are data modifiers, type qualifiers, type conversions, or just extensions of how we going to handle the data types. Then we go for the comments sections, and finally storage classes and basic structures. We're focusing mainly on these first initial topics mainly. So please. The first one is history of C. So we are not can't just code without knowing what is how the C program has just started. So basically, first at 1960, they have created a programming code named ALGOL, which was designed by the Association of Computing Missionaries, led by the Alan J. Perlis, a programmer. And then in 1967, they have created a code BCPL. It is developed by Martin Richard, and by 1970 they have evolved the BCPL code to B under the guidance of Ken Thompson. So these, and finally we get the language C. So C was finally revealed to a world at 1972. It was developed by Dennis Ritchie at AT&T Bell Laboratories. It was mainly and highly initially developed only to operate at Unix operating system, but nowadays we can use it on any other operating systems. So these three members, Martin Richard, Ken Thompson, and Dennis Ritchie, are all colleagues. So they basically come to a conclusion to discover these languages. Okay. So next one is keywords. So before going, what is keyword? And I have given the definition. What is a keyword? So we should know why we are using keyword and what is the main purpose of a keyword. So consider an application like an Instagram. We can post pictures, videos, reels, and any other stories like that. So and we can we can give likes, comments. We can give status like a private account or a public account. We can add hashtags to your pictures. So basically, these are all technical like likes means we like is nothing but we are giving an upvote for a particular picture or a status. It means that it gives an upvote. We are giving a particular liking to that picture. So that the basic meaning of a like we do not change as we go across applications. Like if we upvote in an Instagram, it is the same as we are using in YouTube. So YouTube too, we have seen views, dislikes, and likes. So we can't change the basic meaning of what is a like or what is dislike in a particular application. Similarly, in a Gmail application, we compose an email, we can send an email, we can forward an email, we can trash into an email. So that is, we can delete an email. So we can't change the basic meaning for a word we delete to a forward or send. So I get what you're saying. So delete-ங்கிற வார்த்தையோட அர்த்தத்தை நம்மளால மாற்ற முடியும். So that is what we called as a keyword. So similarly in programming, C programming, we are using a particular set of words for a particular special meaning to it. We cannot change the meaning for a particular word for it. Okay, wow. So these are called the keywords. We are calling them as a reserved words that have a special meaning to it. So next, these are all the keywords available in the C. So there are 32 keywords. So we have classified them according to the needs we need. So first, five keywords that I have shown here comes under the concept of data types, and then we have used 4 other keywords under the concept of data modifiers. Then type qualifiers, and then for storage classes, we'll see this mainly these 4 kinds of keywords in this session, and we'll in the next upcoming session we'll use this keyword for the branching and looping statement. And finally, these kind of keywords are used in a very special occasions for a very particular purpose. We will handle these sessions in the next coming class. So this session you will be focusing mainly on all these 4 different kinds of keywords. So first thing, I hope you understand what is a keyword. Now, what is an identifier? So before we going for an identifier, why we have to use an identifier? So every person has a name. If I want to call a particular person, we have a name, right? So we are only by the name we are able to call them and actually assign them a duty. Similarly, in any records, we have an identifier. For a college, we have a roll numbers or a ID, particular ID to refer who you are as a overall in an organization. So similarly, in a programming concept too, we have a special name called identifiers. We are naming the variables labels or function by a particular name so that we can use them in your program. Identifiers are nothing but a naming concept that we are handling. So we can't just give a random name to any particular variable. There is some sort of guidelines and rules that needs to be followed. So let us see the guidelines for an identifier. So these are the guidelines for a construction of identifier. Identifiers and variables for both of them, the guidelines are same. So first one is first character of an identifier should be either an alphabet or an underscore. So the identifier should start with either an alphabet or an underscore. It can follow by any digit or any other characters like any dollar symbols. We can add them after that, but the first character should always be an alphabet or an underscore. And the second point is it should be both uppercase and lowercase letters are distinct. That is, it should case sensitive. If you type a variable or an identifier under the name, if you give a name like uh, if you give a name, if you give your name in uppercase, it is distinct to a name that you give in lowercase. So that is the point we have mentioned here. So the third scenario is when you add commas or blank spaces. You cannot add a commas or blank spaces in your identifiers. So basically, your identifiers, everything in the programming have a syntax. So syntaxes are nothing but the sentence pattern like in your grammars. So for in English, you have a sentence pattern like this is a subject, this is or a verb. You have to add a verb next to a subject. We have every sentence can be should be finished with a full stop. Like that, we have a basic syntaxes in grammar, right? Similarly, these are all the guidelines that needs to be followed as an identifiers. So the fourth point, keywords should not be allowed. The keywords cannot be represented as an identifier. So the words that we have listed here should not be used as an identifier in your programming. Next one is the length of the identifier. So your identifier's length should not be more than 31 characters. So if you are giving a length, you are giving a variable name like name or an age, so it should be under the length. The length of the character should be under 31. You cannot give a very big long sentence as your variable name. So the final point is the identifier should be written in a meaningful, short, and easy to read. So you cannot give a variable with a random name like so உங்களுக்கு ஒரு பேர் கொடுப்பாங்க இல்லையா உங்க பேருக்கு ஒரு அர்த்தம் இருக்கும். So similarly your identifier should have a meaning. It should be short and it should be easy to read. So if you're using a variable that is complex, then you're referring it in other throughout the program. So it would be complicated to understand the meaning. So we'll see some examples before that. So basically, similarly, like an identifier, we are using a variables. So you are giving a data for a program. So your data is like a water or a tea. Similar, consider your data like that. So it have a particular volume. Like your data is like a 1 cup of water, or it might be a 1 liter of water. So you are pouring that water into a container. So the container that you're giving should be able to hold the size of the data you're giving, right? You cannot pour a 1 cup, 1 liter of water to a teacup. So it will overflows the place, right? So you cannot pour a more than what the container can store. So your variable is the name of the memory location is nothing but it is used to store the data that you're giving should be under the size you are going to give. So that is the point of a variable. It is the name of the memory location. We are just giving the name for the memory location or the container that you are going to store the data. The final thing is it can be reused and modified at any time. So if you are giving a variable like, so we will see in examples I'll show you. So these are the basic declaration of the variables. The basic declaration. So for example, we will discuss what is a data type in the next slides. So just consider this a variable. You have to declare a variable in this way. So if it consider if it's a length or a breadth or area, whatever it is, you have to give them in the name, and you have to finish every sentence using a semicolon in this C programming. So similarly for a definition, the declaration wise, we will not give any value next to the variable, but in definition, we should be initializing those values when you are declaring it. That is the only difference between the declaration and definition. Okay. So before I go into the data types, I'll show you how why we are using these guidelines in your programmings. Yeah. So first, in the first guideline, we have seen that the first character of an identifier should be either an alphabet or an underscore, right? And I have mentioned that the both uppercase and lowercase letters in a variable is distinct, right? So I have made a code here. The variable I have given is an underscore. It can start with an underscore, and this next variable I have given is in lowercase. But the third variable that we have given the same area is in uppercase. So the output of each variable will be distinct. Please, you will see what is a printf function in the next sessions. But just try to see the differences between variables in declaration alone. So if I run this program, you can see that the variable I have initialized for the underscore is minus under 77 is displayed. But then if I give them in a lower case, it is 33. But and next time, the third variable I have mentioned is in uppercase. So every variable that we are using is distinct, independent of what name we have given to them. The way we are using in lowercase and uppercase, everything is distinct in C programming. That is the guidelines that I have shown here. I hope you understand the basic point I have tried here. The next thing is, we have seen that your variable needs to be meaningful, right? So this is also a variable. Int a is equal to 10, b is 5, c is, we are just adding the two numbers. So this is also a variable. But we need to understand what is happening, whether it is an input or output. So this will also give you an output of 15. But if we give a variable in a particular way, like the first one is an input for input data 1, the second one is an input data 2. Finally, we are summing those two numbers to get the output. So by just the variable name itself, we will be able to understand what is the process that is going to happen. That is why we are ensuring that the variable name that we are giving needs to be meaningful and it needs to be short. So both of the program is doing the same activity. It is just adding two numbers. So we can see what is for addition and printf statements in the next sessions. But just try to understand that the variable names that we are given should be meaningful, so that as a programmer you would be able to understand what we are trying to do. Just by writing int a and int b, it will still run, but you have to give them in a conventional way of writing, so that you would be able to understand as a programmer. So that is the reason why we have given that your identifier needs to be meaningful, it should be short and easy to read. I hope you understand what I'm trying to convey. The next thing is a data types. So why we have to need to go for a data types? Consider yourself that you're watching a football game. Okay, so you're watching a football game, so with two teams, 11 players are available. So for each player they will try to give you a position, like some players would be in attack position, some players will be just a midfielders, some other players will be just used for defense. You can just give them a tag name, like they are attack, they are just midfielders. You can just give them as a me middle midfield player as M, or the defensive players as D. So like that wise you can classify those players. Next we can what are the things that would be in a football game, that they would have goals. They have one team would have get 5 goals, one team would have reached 3 goals. So they have put so overall that would be 8 goals. Similarly, those goals, they are also a kind of data. The player position is also a kind of data. The players would have done a lot of fouls. They would have received a red card or a yellow card. They are also a kind of data. You can see that every data is very different from each other. Your name is like a complete strings or characters, whereas your goals or the number of red cards they have received in their lifetime, they are all integers. Whereas if you see for a particular, then you can check for whether how much the win percentage a team can have. They would say it is 45.5%, 50% probability they could have win. So similarly, those percentage will be in decimal values. So for particular game itself, we have a different kinds of data which can be used. So which can be used in your program. So you should know which data type should be used for your particular problem. So we can see for a football game, or you can consider a scenario where you're riding home at your 4:30. So you're going at your particular speed. Your speed will be in of decimal values. Your distance covered, like you're here to home, that will be a particular same amount of distance you're covering. That would be either a decimal value or just an integer value, or a fuel consumption. We might have consumed very low consumption, or a particular liters, so that can be in decimal values or integer values. If you consider as a vehicle, you have many other gears. So if you consider gears, like there would be four gears is available, or six gears is available. So those gears values can be given only in integers, whereas we can have indicators. So these, just for riding home itself, the data that we are having consist of many different kinds of data. So for referring each data type, we need a particular kind to ensure that the data is good. So just like the way I have mentioned before, data is like a water. So your container should be able to hold the amount of data you're giving. You cannot give a integer value data to a character container, right? So you're trying to you have the container that you're trying to give should be able to compatible with your data. So that is why we are having basic data types. These are the five basic data types. The main logic of your data type is to store the amount of memory that you need and the set of operation you have to do. So if you're for a characters or strings, like your name, consider characters or nothing but your name, or hashtags you're using in Instagrams, your comments you're giving in Instagrams, these are all considered as your characters. So integer values can be like the number of goals you put in a game, the number of red cards or yellow cards a player can receive during a game. So these values are all integers, whereas float and double consider as your decimal values. So these decimal values can be like a speed, a distance covered, a fuel consumption of a vehicle, or a air temperature, or air pressure, humidity level. These values will be in float, or they will be in a decimal values. So you have to categorize, you have to use these float and double data type for such data. So void data type is a very special scenario where you will be using those data type only when you have no values. If your data is just empty or it has no value, you would be using a void data type. So now let us focus on particular data type alone. So consider you are giving a character. So a character, pick a character is so we have seen the variable declaration here, right? So we are giving a data type and then a variable. If you are giving as a definition, we are giving as a value to that variable, right? If I am giving a trying to define a variable with a character, you will be giving a character, a variable name, and then the value for the variable. Okay. So similarly, we are giving a character data type. The data type we are using is character. I'm trying to create a variable like a pick a character from A to Z. So then I picked a character. So just focus on this line. So this is how you declare a variable in C. You're just getting a particular data type, like a particular data, and you're assigning that data to this variable, which is a data type of a character. So your character can store only a single character or a letter. It is not limited or focused only to A to Z. It is you can even give numbers, but your numbers should be given in quotes here. We can also give other symbols like underscore, dollar, hashtags, all considered under a characters only. So it takes only a single byte of memory. Single byte of memory is as 8 bits. So when you try to declare a statement in a C, all this information will be converted into binaries. Please don't get confused with the binaries that I mentioned here. Just ensure that your data that you're given is written in 8 bits. It doesn't matter whether you're giving C or a 6 or 5, whatever the value you're giving, the in character data type, it would be represented in 8 bits. So if you consider your data is represented in 8 bits, the range of the character needs to be known. So you should know how much range your data can be given to this. You can't just give a very random value to a variable, right? It should has a range. So the range for a character is minus 128 to 127. So it is nothing but, so if you are used, basically this range and the number of bits required is correlated. So if you consider if you understand that your character need 8 bits, then the range should be in this way. So if it is 8, then it should start from minus 2 power 7. So 2 power 7 is nothing but you're multiplying 2 with 2 7 times. So how much you will get? You will get 128. Next, you will using the similarly, it is 2 power 7 means 2 minus 128. Here 2 power 7 to the minus 1. So that would be 127. I hope you understand. I will repeat myself. So just understand the concept. For a character, we are just storing a single character or a letter. It can be from A to Z or digits, but or symbols like hashtags and dollars. Just you have to make sure that you are giving them in a single line while declaring a variable. It takes 1 byte of memory, that is an 8-bit. So if you take 8 bits, mean the range for a character data types runs from minus 2 to the power of 7. Starts from minus 2 to the power of 7. Here I given n, so here I mentioned that n minus 1. So you will have minus 128. So from minus 128 to plus 127, that is the range value you can use for a character. So basically here you can give from any values from minus 128 to 127 for a character data type. And move on to the next data type. So next data type is integer. So for basically the integer is here we are going to store an integer value. As the name itself says, we are going to store an integer value here. It takes 2 bytes of memory. So first one is here anyone have doubts?
Give an example for integer, ma'am.
Yeah. So you want to know the example for variable names or what kind of data comes under integer?
That you have told that 2 bytes is equal to 16 bits. Please give an
Yeah,
example for that, ma'am.
yeah. I've shown here. I'll show you. So yeah, I have given an example here. So if for integer, the data I have considered as an example is number of years. So you can consider number of red cards you can a player has consumed during a game. Similar, and then we can consider a goals football team has scored during a game. So, like that wise, your variable you can give over here. Just like character, the only change we have made is the value that I'm going to give and the data type that I have mentioned. Apart from that, it is very similar to that. I hope you understand what I have said. Do you still
Yes,
have
ma'am.
doubts? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So here in integer data type, you are going to store an integer. So it can be just like I've said, it can be the goal scored by a person, or it can be number of red cards or yellow cards a person scored, or a distance covered by a machine. I mean a vehicle. So like that ways you can give anything over here. The variable you can give. The value you're going to give should falls under this range, just like the character. So here I have mentioned integer can be stored 2 bytes. So for 2 bytes means 16 bits. This 16 bits is I have mentioned here, like 8 bytes, 8 bits, 8 bytes I have mentioned here. So for 16 bits, it's just like in the previous slide, like for n bits, we are going to say minus 2 to the power of n minus 1. So here for integer, here it is minus 2 to the power of 15. If you try and solve it, you will get the answer as minus 32,768. And so the integer range lies between minus 32,768 to plus 32,767. So the values you are trying to give over here should be within this range so that you can use the variable here. The next one is float. So we have seen for a character, we have seen for just a simple integer values. Now we are going to go forward with the decimal values. So decimal values can be like a salary, or it can be like a temperature, or it can be a pressure, or your speed while you're traveling. Um, or your win percentage, or your CGPA criteria, there's all considered as your decimal values. So you can just declare a variable for them and you can give the decimal values to you here. So there are two data types as I mentioned above. You can use a float data type or you can use a double data type. So float data types only stores 23 decimal values. Like after point there will be values, right? You can store only up to 23 decimals. Whereas if you use a double data types, it can store more decimal ranges. So if your data that you're going to give have more decimal values or you need more accuracy to your point, you can go forward with a double data type. Whereas your data type doesn't have much big decimal values, then you can go forward with the single precision data, that is a float data type. All the data types that you're going to use only changes from here and the data that you're trying to give. So for a flow data type, its whole structure is a bit different. So first bit that you're going to use will act as a sign bit. So the sign bit, so if you are trying to give a negative value, the first bit will be assigned as 1. So that the computer would know that your value that you're trying to give is a minus. So if I try to give is a minus 75.5, then your sign bit would have a value 1. If it is a positive value, it wouldn't have a value. The next 8 bits will be used for the exponent part. That is the 75 that I'm trying to represent in a computer. So in computer, you would take 8 bits. So whatever the data you're trying to put over here will be considered into an 8-bit and will be represented in your computer. Then for the final decimal part, it would take 23 bits to represent the decimal part. After the point, whatever the values that you're given will be considered as your mantissa part and would be represented here. So this is the float and it would take the range of 3.4 e to the exponent to the power of minus 38 to plus 38. So just like the ways, so it's a 4-byte memory means it will have 32 bits. So 1 byte is 8 bits. So we have seen it here. 1 byte is 8 bits. So here we have seen 2 bytes is 16 bits. So now we are using 4 bytes, which means we are using 32 bits. So we are using 32 bits to just store a one single value of a float. You can see how the size is getting varied for each one. So, and then for a double data type, it would take 8 bytes of memory to store. Both of them store only the decimal values, but when you need for more part just to represent your decimal part alone, you just go forward with a double. Otherwise, you can just use float values itself. There would be much difference for it, but the accuracy level that you need for your data needs to be mentioned here. So this is an example for a double. So if the salary alone will take a float value, it's just 0.75 means that will be a lot of person you will be in an organization that you need to calculate. So if I calculate all the sum of all the employees, it needs to be accurate to every single point of perception, right? So for that, I have used a data type as double. So yeah, so since it takes 8 bytes of memory, so the range would be from 2 to the power of 64. So yeah, so this takes, oh, you can, if you add this, you will get 64 bits. So 52 plus 12, it will get 64 bits. That is equivalent to the 8 bytes of memory we are trying to store. So just as a recollection, does anybody have any doubts? So this is a data type. So we have seen character, integer, float, and double, and we have seen example for each data type and how it is represented in a computer. So just ensure that what kind of data we are storing for each data type and what is the range for each data type. Just understand that basic concepts alone. It will be fair enough. You don't have to know how the C is represented into binary values like this. So just understand why we are using, when we have to use a character data type, what is the range of the character data type, how the range for the character data type. So just venture that alone. So we have seen 4 so far. The next one is a void data type. So void data type, as I mentioned, it is an empty data type. It has no values. If you are having a data type that is literally nothing, so we can't express, we won't have any value, we won't be assigning any value to such data, means you can use a void data type. But predominantly we won't use as a declaration like this. We won't give us a void a equal to 0. We won't use as a in a data in a void. So it is predominantly used in functions, which will be handled in next sessions. So just make sure that you understand this basic four basic data types. These are the 4 basic data types. If you have any doubts, you can ask them. If you don't have any data, so I will so which one is valid or invalid? So we have seen 4 data types, and we have know what is a variable declaration and what is a variable definition. So here I have used a float data type, and then I have started with the integer value, and then underscore with the sum. So it would be invalid, as we have already mentioned in the guidelines that we should not start the first letter of an alphabet with the integer. We should start with either an underscore or with an alphabet. So this would throw an error to you. So it is an invalid. You should not declare using in this way. So instead of using in this way, you can use it in this way. In like the sum underscore 7 would be a valid right one. I hope you understand. Then in the third scenarios, so in case is equal to 74, we have seen 32 keywords. So case is one of the keywords in the C. So I will show you the keywords again, so you would be able to. Case is one of those keywords. You cannot use any of the keywords that we have seen so here as a variable or an identifier in your programming. So the statement that I given here would also be invalid. So in case equal to 74 would be invalid. It would throw an error that it is a special reserved word that you cannot use as an identifier. The next one, character symbol is equal to given a very large number. We have seen the range for a character. It is only from minus 128 to 127. We cannot give this very big value as a character. It would throw an overflow. So you cannot use them. So the only statement that is valid over here is the second statement, float sum underscore 7. So make sure that your variable that you're trying to give is follows the guidelines, and make sure that it is not a keyword. The keyword will be give you throw an error, and the value that you're trying to assign to a keyword should not be out of range, or it should not overflow the variable. So you're trying to give a character, so it should be under the range from minus 128 to plus 128. So ensure that you're giving them in the right way. That is the basic. Now we have seen what is data types and kinds of data types. Like for a character, we have to use a char data type. For integer value, we have to use a int data type. For decimal values, we based on the accuracy that are needed, or the how much of exponential part we needed, we have considered float data type and a double data type. So for data modifier, we are going to either increase the range for a data type, or we can decrease the range for a data type. So if you are trying to give a value, when you are started counting, so let us consider a cricket game. So first at the initial stages, the sixes, the person would have started starts from 0, right? So by the time the tournament like an IPL or a World Cup ends, they would have gone forward with many number of sixes. The ranges would have been out of bounded, right? So by that time, we have to ensure that your data needs to be modified, so that you are trying to increase the size for the container. So first time it will be very low. Now we are trying to increase the container size. Like for such a situation, we are using a data modifiers. I hope you understand. So we are using keywords, the keywords that I have listed above. So the 4 keywords that we are using for a data modifier is the short, long, signed, and unsigned. So we are just prefixing these data types before the variable. Like instead of using float sum underscore 7, you would be using long float sum underscore 7, or a short float sum underscore 7. In that way, you have to mention the data modifiers. So it is only specify the amount of memory needs to be allocated for a variable. We are changing the size of the already existing basic data types. So we have seen the data type for int, right? So the basic data type of int is range from only from -30 to 768 to 3 to 767. Now we are appending those data modifiers to a int. So we have seen how much the range changes for a basic data type. So basically short is default for a int data type. That is why the short and signed data type didn't affect the basic range of the int data type. So ensure that you note that out. So for a short int data type, it is same as that of previous default int data type. So you can use the same ranges -30 to 768 to +30 to 767. So when you are giving unsigned values, so when you are giving unsigned values means you are not using any negative value as your data. So what happens is that the yours here it is -30 to 768. From somewhere around here it will be 0. Then you have 30 to 767, right? So the negative value sizes are added to your positive sides. So if you add this both value without negation, 30 to 768 plus 30 to 767, you would get a value of 65,535. The data, the range of the data is just given only to the positive side of your data. Do you have any doubts over here? So, okay then.
Ma'am, what is the difference between short int and signed int, ma'am?
So short, so okay. Signed int is only used when you are trying to give us a negative value. You're mentioning these are all just the basic ranges is just same. The intention is different. That we are we are trying to give a signed int means we are only trying to give a negative value. You are trying to show the compiler that we might using the negative values to here. Apart from that, it is not much difference in the range or the functions that you're trying to use. We are just trying to intend your computer that the values that I'm trying to give may consider under your negative values. Similarly, for a short int, we are trying to show that we are not going to use any more bigger ranges. So defaultly, your compiler will know that your data that you're trying to give is a short and signed. That is the reason why your basic data type itself has the same range. Okay, can you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, thank you. So basically your basic int data type is a short and a signed data type. That is why the ranges is same. But when you're trying to give only positive values, you can increase your range by using unsigned integer. Or if you want to increase your range in both negative values and in positive values, you can use a long int as your data type. Just ensure that why we are using this 4 modifiers. You're just changing the range values based on your data that you're trying to give. Okay. So if you are going to if you are going to consider a contest where let us consider you are going to make a quiz. So if you are going to give negative values for your unanswered questions or the wrong questions, then you have to consider your marks. That your marks should not consider just positive values. You might have negative values. People might give all wrong answers. So at that situation, you should be able to give us signed values or a short value so that you can only use the you can also use the negative values in your data. So but if you try to give a only positive values in your data, you can just go forward with unsigned it so that your range will be higher. I hope you understand.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then type qualifiers. See, type qualifiers is just another extension for a data type. So if you're we have two type qualifiers. We are just giving an additional property to your value. So for a constant, we have two type qualifiers. One is constant, another one is volatile. So constant is to ensure that your value will not change throughout the program. Consider a situation, if you are consider a football game, the time duration for a game will not change. The extra time they are trying to give is only when the game gets abrupted, so that the time needs to be given. Apart from that, for a football game, their game duration should be 1 hour 30 minutes. Similarly, if you are for a college, the time schedule for a particular class, you are giving a timing, right? So those values will not change throughout the situation. So such values will be constant. So we can ensure that those values will not be changed throughout your program. So for that situation, you can use a constant data type. So it is just like the previous data modifiers. We are just prefixing those variable by the const qualifier. So if you are just giving int a variable with a constant value, so instead we are just giving an const prefixed with this data type. So an example is a pi values. So pi values, if you're trying to calculate for an area or a perimeter, if you're using a pi, those values will not be changed throughout your program. You can use them as a const. You can prefix those variables with the const qualifiers. So next point is the const variable needs to be initialized during the declaration statement. For if you are trying to create a const float, you should initialize with a 3.14 first time itself. You cannot give them with a pi alone. You have to initialize those variables. Just for constants alone, this statement is an additional rule. Make sure that you're initializing initializing the value for the constant variable. Next one is a volatile variable. So for a volatile variable, defaultly your data is an volatile variable only. Without giving volatile itself, it comes under a volatile variable. But you can explicitly give them as a volatile in a prefix in a way. So it is used for prefixing the variable with a volatile qualifier. Volatile tells the compiler that the value assigned to the variable can be modified. So if here we can modify the value of the variable, but for a constant we cannot modify throughout the program. So make sure that you understand it. So the third one is the volatile variable cannot be catched by the register. So if you in a computer memory itself, there are a lot of memory locations where you can access those variables faster. So catch is one of such location where you can access the data that you're trying to give to a machine faster. So but if you're using a volatile variable, it will not be able to do it. So that is the concept here. So just understand that a volatile variable can be modified throughout the program. That is the basic concept here. And you have to give the prefix with the volatile variable if you want to use that data mod type qualifier. Here is now we have seen what is data type, how to declare the variables, and you know the ranges now. Since we have seen both long, short, everything we have seen, you know the ranges. So now I have given that a character symbol as a 75, and I have mentioned that it is valid too. But we have seen that the character variable will only take values from either letters or a symbols with a single quote. Just like here, you should be given, right? But I have given in this way. But it would still respond to the computer will still respond to you as a right validation only, because the character that you're trying to give will take only ASCII values. See, for an ASCII values from small a to small z, it ranges from 97 to 122. An ASCII value for a small a is 97, and ASCII value for small z is a 122. Similarly, for a capital A, ASCII value will be 65 to 90. For uppercase letters, it will be from 65 to 90. Here, if I give given a value as 75, means it would comes under the category of uppercase letters. I will show you the output for situations too. Just know that your character value will take an ASCII value of the data that you're trying to give. So if you try to give an integer value to it, it would take the ASCII value of it and assign to it. I will show the output for it too. The next output declaration I have given is an integer variable with the character assigned as A. So similarly, it would take the ASCII value of A and assign to the character. So I have said that a small a would take the ASCII value of 97. You will see how the output will come. I'll show the output and we go with this. See, I have given this character as a value of 75. The ASCII value of the ASCII value of k is 75. So it shows that the variable it has is a k. And for a character, I have given as a value a, but the value I have mentioned that your ASCII ranges from 97, right? So it has shown you the range as 97. In calculate length, I have said int, but I have given a value as decimal. So it would consider only the integer part of it and assign to it. See, it will consider only a integer part of it and assign to it. Similarly, for a float, I have given a letter. It would take the ASCII value as 1 or 3 and would append zeros to it and would consider as a float value. So these kind of conversion is called implicit type conversion. We are converting a particular data type to another data type. So if you guys have any doubts in this, I have mentioned here. So you're just changing the data types value. If you want to know,
Ma'am, shall we change the double data type into the float?
yeah, I will come on to that. I will show the hierarchy of which is compatible, and you will be able to know that. So you have no doubts in this one, right? The one I have shown here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then I'll show you. This is a hierarchy. Your double is here, your float is here, right? You're asking me whether you can convert a double data type to a float data type. You can convert, but you might lose information for it, because if you're trying to give a bigger value to a smaller size data type, right? Double has a range of 8 bytes, but whereas float has range only for 4 bytes. So if you're trying to give a data type of a double size to a float, it would lose data. Like the precision we have given, its range is different, right? So you have seen the ranges for it. So here we have seen 23 bits for the range, whereas in double data type they have 52. So only the first 23 bits will be able to allocate for it in the Mantis part. So you might lose information when you try to give a double to a float. Whereas if you try to give a valid from float to double, it would work. It would just append zeros and it would work. You see the hierarchy for it. Only based on the hierarchy it would work. So you can give in this way. It would work without any loss of information. You can go in this way, where you can change a character to shorthand or a shorthand to int. But if you try to give from unsigned int to int, or in the reverse direction, I mean double to a float or a float to an integer, you might lose a loss of precision, just like I've seen here, right? So here we have tried to give a float value to an integer. It still worked, but the decimal point we are trying to represent will be removed. Do you understand the concept now? Do you still
Yes,
have?
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So this conversion that we had done so far is an implicit type conversion. Basically, the compiler itself is doing the conversion. So this kind of conversion is an implicit conversion. That is, it is done by the compiler itself. So it is an automatic type conversion. We can also call it as an automatic type conversion. It still has any doubt? Right.
From character to integer, do we have any loss?
What's it, Alpha? I couldn't hear you. What is your doubt? At least come again. Is anybody still having doubts in this? If you can't reach out, just comment at least. Fine then. Yeah, is there any data loss if we convert from character to int? See, we have changed from character to int itself, right? See here, converting a character to an int. Character to an int. Here we have done a character to an int only, right? We are giving a character data type to an int. There is no data loss we are trying to do in that way. We are still getting integer. The value is same. 97 is equivalent to A and A is equivalent to 7. So there is no data loss in that part. What else you have? If we convert from here. Do you understand now? Say yes or no. It will be fine. While we are doing from character to int, there is no data loss. Thank you. You can try it out yourself too. Yeah, it's just notify the how I'm trying to do it, and you just in the next session you will be handling the how to give a printf statement for each variables. So after that, if you try and give this type conversion, you will be able to see it. Otherwise, you can just note it now and you try it and after the next session. Just understand that you can change the data type of a variable. That is the main concept of the type conversion. Thank you. That is the implicit type conversion. So here, this is the thing we have seen. So by basically implicit type conversion, there might be a loss of information if you're trying to give in a reverse way. Just you're trying to give a float to an integer value or a double to an integer value, there might be loss of information. But apart from that, it works fine. So we can typecast the values in explicitly also. Like instead of just giving the randomly by directly giving them like a integer temp, we have seen in the last examples, right? Instead of giving in this way, if you are giving integer but we are trying to give a float value, this is implicitly type conversion. But whereas explicit means we are giving them what kind of data it needs to be converted. Here the temperature is in decimal value. I have declared them as a float. It is a decimal value. But instead we want to know the pollution level in integer level. So now I am converting that float value into an integer. So we can do this explicitly too, but the hierarchy still remains the same. If you're trying to convert a float or a decimal value to an integer, you would still lose the data. By precision level, you might still lose data. But we can give them explicitly or by implicitly. But you just note that there is a hierarchy for it. You can there might be a loss of information when you try to do a type conversion itself. Okay. This one is a comments. So comments section is predominantly used by the programmer alone. It's based only for a documentation, or this will not affect your programming, the running process. So it will basically just get ignored by the compiler. In the online compiler itself, they will have a comments, right? See, these are all comments. They have just given them that this code will run if you just like a commands whether to know what is happening here. So I can also give them like this statement. This statement is implicit type conversion. This is just to notify yourself that this statement is using an implicit type conversion. This will not affect your programming point of view. If you still run in this one, it would still give the same output. So this is just for your documentation purpose to understand what you're trying to do in your program. So if you're trying to give them the value that I'm trying to assign here is 75, instead you can say that the value symbol is K. Now you'll be able to know that you're expecting an output K for it. So just like that, for documentation purpose, you can use comments. So if there is a single line comment and there is multiple line comments. So for single line comments, you are just using the double slashes, just like I've mentioned here. Or for a multiple line comments, you can use the slash star. So after using this, you can give anything inside that, it would completely ignored by the compiler. Final topic session that we are going to see is storage classes. See, storage classes is nothing but a lifetime for a variable. We have seen so many variables and we have seen data types and ranges for it. But now we are going to see is how long can we use that variable? Will it be available all the time? See, you are a person, right? You are in a home. Assume that you are in home. Suddenly, if you're asking about a work that you have given in the college, then you won't be able to show them because you say that what I have done is in the college. I haven't in my home. So you say in that way, right? If you submitted an assignment or a particular task for it, the materials you have done is in college, you would be able to access that. Similarly, if a variable is given in a particular location or a block or a function or within a particular statement, it also has its lifetime for it, a scope for it. We can only access those variables only during that particular point. So if you want to extend the lifetime of a variable, if you want to use it along throughout the program, there are some special words that can be added to the variable so that you can use them. So basically, storage classes are used only to describe the feature or a function of a variable. It basically gives the lifetime of a variable. You can see the statement lifetime or scope throughout this session after that. So it is basically helpful in tracing a variable during the execution of a program. So if you're trying to give a variable like a temperature in first point, and then you're updating it, so you will be able to know that the data type that I have used there, I'm updating it in the following statements. So just like that, you would be helpful to trace a variable during the execution. So there are basically 4 storage classes: auto, register, extend, and then finally static. We'll see just this 4. So basically, any data type that you're trying to give is an auto data type. So instead of using int, we can just without auto itself, it is basically defaultly it is an auto. So auto storage class specifies that a variable is in a stack area of memory. Just assume that it is in a CPU where it can access it faster. So it is implicit in the variable declaration. So that is what implicit in the variable declaration nothing but it is defaultly auto. Every variable declaration that you're trying to give is an auto declaration. Without auto itself, it just means that you are giving in the auto declaration storage classes. So auto variables can only be accessed within the function or a block when they are declared. So if I'm using if I'm using this in a only in the main function, then you can use only in that file. You cannot use across different files at all. So basically, it would have a default garbage value, or you can assign them initially with an 89 or 0, so that you can give an output values. So basically, it is an access outside the scope using a pointers. So you can see pointers in the upcoming sessions. Just understand that basically every variable declaration that you are doing is an auto storage class. It comes under auto storage class. Extend is a global variable. Whenever you need a variable that needs to be used throughout your program, independent of whichever function you are trying to use, whichever conditions you are trying to use, if you want it throughout your program, you have to use a variable, you have to use the storage class extend. So you can give them in this way: extend int index equal to 0. So if we declare the statement in this way throughout whatever next statements that I'm trying to give, it would you can access the index variable. So extend storage class specify the variable of the same name to be accessed from another file. You can also cross files. I mean, if you are trying to run in a particular program, so I'm trying to run in a program 1.c, let's just assume, then I'm trying to run the same variable in another program, where we can just link them, and we can use the same variable in the next file too. That means we can use the same variable in one or more files. We can just use this just one time declaration, and we can just use them in whenever we need it. So for such a situation, we can go for an extend variable. So it is used when a situation where variable is declared in a block where it isn't used. That is, we can declaration can be done once, and we can use it any number of times. So it is a global variable. It is initialized with a legal value. It should be legal value is nothing but it should falls under the range of the data type that we are mentioning. So that is a legal value which can be accessed anywhere. So it is very useful for sharing variables in modular programs. Modular programs are nothing but for each functions you are trying to give when you consider functions, you will be able to know that we can add variables. I mean, you can perform a certain operation. Like if you're trying to add 2 variables, you can do them as a function itself. Such performance would call as a modular programs. So basically, just understand that extend variables can be used anywhere in the programs, anywhere across the files too. We can use the extend variables in more than one files. Third one is the register. So a register storage class specify the variable to be placed in the available register by the compiler to improve the runtime of the program. So registers are one of the faster access memory. So in your computer, there are some basic memory locations like cache, registers, main memory itself. So registers is one of the places where the compiler will be able to perform the operation like addition, subtraction, or division, basic operations in a faster time. So if you are trying to give them a register to a variable, it would be improve the performance of the time. The time you are trying to wait to get an output would be improved. So instead of waiting for 10 minutes, 10 seconds, you would get the output in a second itself. So for such scenarios, you can use registers. So consider yourself in a situation where you are doing program for an rocket launches or a time sensitive informations. For such situation, your output should comes in a faster way, right? So for such situations, you can use a register variables. So if the register variable, if the register is not available, it will store in the memory itself. So if the register would actually make your program slow, if you misuse the property of register, it would actually make your program can slow. So only use register only if you think that the variable that you're using is going to be repeatedly handled again and again in your program. If it not necessary, you can just leave it as an auto exec. No need to give them as a register. The fourth one is a static variable. So static is a very important storage class. It is used in a lot of situations. So it is basically extends the scope of a variable. It is not like just an global identifier. You can initialize them and use them at the end of the program, but the initialization is done default with zeros. So the main change is that you can use it it is very private. That is only if you're giving them to a particular functions or variables. You are accessing them as a static means for a particular file, it is private to only those variables that you're trying to give. So if I'm giving them as a count of n is equal to 10 and I'm trying to update in the upcoming sessions, means you can give them in a static. Based on the initialization you can be done over that. So that is the purpose of a static storage class. If you declare a static variable inside a block, the variable remains even after the block is gone. It is very similar to extern, but here we are trying to do it in a filed manner. So basically, a lot of the programs that variables that are trying to give will fall only under the auto variable consideration. Only if you're in need of such situation where you have to extend your scope, make sure that you use a static or extend. Apart from that, it is just for your purpose that you should know there are keywords that you can use to extend the life of a variable. Please don't get confused with this storage classes. So we have seen what is the data type, what are the variables, what are the identifiers, how to increase the size of a data type. We have seen all of them here. So now we are going to see basic structure of C program. This is the basic structure. It consists of 6 sections: a documentation section, a linking section, a definition section, a global declaration section, or a main section, and the subfunction section. So in this overall C to C program, we may not be including the subfunction section. Apart from that, we will be seeing all those 5 sections in our C to C program. So first one is a documentation section. We have used comments. So I have given a sample scenario in the class in a way. So just refer to it. So a documentation section consists of a comments that we are trying to use. A linking session uses the header files. So a header files can be a pre-existing one, that is a library header files, or a user-defined header files. In the next session, that is in tomorrow's class, you will see what is a header files and basic library functions and what are the things that needs to be included over here. So you will after looking to tomorrow's class, make sure you come back and see what is in the linking session. We are just having those header files. Header files are given with the .h files, right? This .h files are called as a header files. stdio.h is nothing but an input-output data, header file. So it is a pre-existing one. We can also give an user-defined one in this way too. Third section is a definition section. So hashtag define means basically what I have given is a number 1, number 2 are just variables that we are giving them. We are defining number 1 as a value 2. So we can also give them as int num1 equal to 2. That is also right. This one is also right. So we are giving these kind of, if we give them as a hashtag define, we will call them as a macro definition. It is very similar to int num1 equal to 2. But we can use this num1 variable throughout the program, not just in void main or just in one function. We can use them throughout the session. For that purpose alone, we are giving a definition section. The fourth section is the global declaration section. A global declaration section is nothing but a variable or a function. So you can have any variable like int sum of _2, or you can give a function as int add of these kind of things are functions. You can see them in the function part. Just note that you can see functions and variables here. Just know that you can declare those variables outside the main function. The fifth one is a main section. So in the main section, we are just adding of two numbers, or in the variable declaration that we have seen, all comes under the main section. So initially, no, doesn't matter whatever you have given in the above, what your program will start running only from the main section. Whatever you start from in the first line of your program will be referred. So if when you give this piece of code to a computer, it would start from a main function. It would check what is it, whether the declaration is given. It will see for sum of 2. So sum of 2, it would go back and check. Yeah, sum of 2 is declared. You can use it. Then you check, we have given a function num1 and num2, whether num1 and num2 is given ahead. Yes, num1 and num2 is available. We can use those values here. So just by that way only it would refer into the previous section. So computer only knows what is a void main function. It would just go for the first line of the void main function and starts running from it. These header files are just included after it gets referenced from here. Do you guys have any doubts over this?
Please explain about implicit type conversion.
Implicit type conversion. Again. So your type conversion is basically nothing but you're converting a single data type to another. So you can convert a basic data types like a character, integer, float, or double, anything to any other. But there might be a loss of data while converting a data type to another. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to convert using an implicit way or an explicit way. Okay, first understand that. So implicit conversion is nothing but defaultly doesn't we don't need to explicitly mention that we are trying to convert this variable value into a character data type. So you can also give this like this. If I give in this way, it would mean that I'm explicitly telling that Soundify needs to be converted into a character. But if I didn't give this statement here, if I didn't give this statement and just give the value alone, means implicitly the computer itself understand, the compiler itself understand that the value I'm supposed to give needs to be converted into a character. So in such a situation, we are saying that it is implicitly converted. Do you get the point?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Instead of explicitly mentioning that it needs to be converted into character, if the computer itself, the compiler itself understand that it needs to be converted into a character, we call them as an implicit type conversion. And another question, ma'am, it's look like a private public protected members in C++. Yes, it is similar to private public protected members. In just like in C++, it is for C we are using in that way. If after functions, you would be able to understand what is a storage go bit more detail. So basically, just note that auto, static, register, and static register and extend, all those storage classes are used to define the how long your variable can access. It is very similar to public, protected, and private that you have seen in C++. If you know C++, it is very similar to that one. Any other questions? Do you guys have any problems in knowing what is the basic structure of C?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. So do Do you guys have any questions so far? Please tell us a little more about the static. So you're asking about static, right? So, so let's see what. It would be more interesting if you know more operations on how to handle a data type. So I will just make sure that you have seen. See, I have given, you asked about static, right? So I have given the value as A, and I have tried to increment that value in here. So here, even if I increment, it would just, you can use that value in an additional functions. So that is the property we can give using a value static over here. So if you didn't mention as an assign a value over here, it would defaultly assign to a 0, and then it would start incrementing. It would won't change throughout the program. So if I try to give and then add another one function and try to append, the value stored in A would keep have its value, right? If I try to print off over here, see the value of the 10 is unchanged over here. It isn't implemented whether I have changed during a function. So this is what I have tried to ensure in the storage classes. So the function you're giving in a 10 is just appendable only over here. So only when you give the value 10, that is the value of A does not change. That even after if you add a function or increment it over here, I've just added +1 to a value and it showed that 11 in that function when I try to print out. But when I try to print in a main function itself, it would give only the value that I have mentioned here. It would show that it has been changed. That is a property of a static. But if you try to give an extend over here, it would change the value of it. whatever the value that you're trying to give will never get unchanged if you're trying to use a static or a constant. So if I try to give a constant value and if I try to change the value of a constant, it wouldn't change. I'll show that part along. So you will see through a storage class after you understand functions and operators. It would be better in that way, but I'll show for a constant value. Const int. I assume that value of a constant a is equal to 10, and if I try to print that 10, the constant value of the a will be printed. But if I try to increment the value of an a, to throw an error. So since I'm trying to just explain, since I have time, I'm just trying to show what are the properties of a constant here. So for a constant, we cannot change the value of the variable, just like I mentioned before. So static concepts and register concept, you would be able to understand it more when you try to go forward with the functions or with the branching statements and looping statements. So just now for that, just understand what is register and what is static alone, and what is constants, why we need to go for constants. What would be the best compiler for C? See, right now, for running C programs, you can just use an operating system like a Linux or a Ubuntu itself. You can have a inbuilt compiler for in that itself. You don't need to have a special IDE for a C program for it all. So I would recommend a compiler in that way. But basically, if you're trying to run a program in your Windows, you can use a GCC compiler itself for running. For running any program, if you're trying to be you're trying to want to know more on programming, and you're trying to run a lot of programs like not just C or Python or Java, it is very helpful if you're trying to have an operating system like an Ubuntu or a Linux, because basically defaultly it would have those compilers in them. You don't need to you don't need to install any more softwares on that operating systems. But if you're trying to run a program on Windows and all, you need a special IDE or a compiler separately. So I wouldn't recommend OS itself rather than having a better compiler. Stop functions section is compulsory in a program. Stop function section. Where is the stop function section? What are the softwares that we can develop with C languages? So you can develop any kind of softwares, but basically C program would take a little bit more lines of code to run a software. You can also do a graphics kind of softwares using C also. So because C is the first languages that comes first apart from the recent languages like Python or Java. So we can do lot of graphics softwares also using C, or you can do a basic simple applications like a calculators using C also. So they have many inbuilt functions. We just have to understand that what are the functions that are available, built-in functions, library functions available in C, and then you can go forward with developing softwares using it. An explicit type conversion, if you are not give any care, then the computer can automatically assign to the output. Yeah, in explicit type conversion itself, we have to mention whether we are trying to give a character or an integer. So if you didn't mention that, it would automatically assign. That is called implicit type conversion. Thank you. Any more doubts that you are having? Any doubts you are having apart from it? So I don't know what you're trying to mean by stop function section is compulsory in a program. I didn't mention any stop function in your program at all. Can you explain more on what you're trying to convey here? So in the tomorrow session, you will be able to know more on library functions. What is stdio orders? What are the basic printf statement? How we can get an input from a user? How we can right now we know how to store a data. What is the data? How we can what kind of data is available? How we can store a data to a variable? Like in that way, we have moved forward in this session. In the next session, we can see how in how many ways we can get data from a user and how many ways we can print those data from a user. We are just going to see how an input and output can be done in a C in the next sessions. Right now we have seen what are the basic concepts, what are keywords, why we need to go forward with the keyword, why we need to go for why we need a variable, how can we give a name for a variable, how can we give a value, how the data types can be given, how we can increase a range for a data type, how the type conversion occurs. Such basic concepts we have seen in this today's session. Do you have any doubts based on the data types or type conversions for that? Guru Vashini. I still don't understand what you're trying to mean. If you don't have any doubts, you can leave the session right now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.